Alright, we're still kind of in a little bit of a blizzard, although it has calmed down greatly since yesterday. The wind's still blowing pretty good, but it's not snowing, so that's good. Need to get my driveway plowed, but until the wind stops, it's basically pointless because you'll go out there, you'll plow it, you'll make the piles, then the piles are going to catch more snow from the wind blowing, and then it's all drifted back shut again in an hour. So it's like, wait till tomorrow morning, and when it's not windy and not snowing, and it'll not be wasting your time. But anyway, today I'm gonna work on the starter off of the T. Try to figure out why it's not throwing the pinion gear out into the ring gear all the way without bumping the key a bunch of times. I'm hoping it's just something gummed up here in the throw out fork. If not, it's got to be a weak solenoid. Because the way these things are supposed to work is you hit the key, the solenoid throws the starter all the way in, and then the starter motor starts rolling over. Well, the way it is right now, the starter motor starts rolling over before the pinion gear is all the way engaged in the ring gear. So, have to get it apart and see. So yeah, that's basically where we're at. I got to work here on the wood bench because Dad's got a cylinder all tore apart on that bench. So, anyhow, first things first, got to take these two bolts out, which tie the whole thing together, and then it separates into the end cap, the magnet housing, or magnet armature housing, and then this and this are actually the drive cone, and this end cap are actually two separate pieces. So that's where we begin. The starter motor actually runs great. Now, there's nothing wrong there. It'll turn the diesel over like it's not even there, so I'm not worried about anything physically being wrong with the armature or anything like that. It's just a matter of we got to get it where it's not grinding gears. I've never seen anything like that before. There's a sleeve on the bolt. Come on. It's like almost like a fire blanket type material. Bushing looks good. Landing on the armature looks good. Brushes look good. Just a little scuzzy. So now, this should just slide apart. As long as we're not hung up here on the rubber, which it looks like we are. I mean, other than just needing cleaned up, everything in here looks pretty good. Now we have to take these bolts out. which looks like I'm not going to be able to get on that with a socket, so tell you what, it was fun getting this off the tractor as cold as it is. The third bolt back here behind this bulge, you gotta lay your hand, there's only enough room to like lay your hand on the bell housing and get 2 fingers back here. Well, all the metal parts on the tractor are so cold you can only lay your hand on the bell housing long enough to get about 3 turns on the bolt, and then your hand was burning from the cold. So it took a minute to get this thing off. The third starter, the back starter bolt on these things is really a joy to get to. Guess I should have put clocking marks on that. I didn't realize there was multiple positions for it. I mean, it's basically got to go like that. So, I mean, it's not that hard to put back together. Well, everything how this is inside the solenoid. The solenoid pulls on it, throws the gear out, and then the starter starts running. And this all runs super smooth, so I'm guessing it's a case of the solenoid's weak and it's not pulling on it hard enough. Because that basically takes no effort. So it might just be a case of having to get some parts and cleaning it up while we're at it. Okay, I'm not going to take this part, or the throw out section apart any further than this, because I don't have to, because everything moves freely. If stuff was gummed up and you had to work for it, then I would take it further apart to clean it up. But since this clearly is not the problem, I'm going to leave it. That way I don't risk damaging more parts trying to get it apart. But basically, if you had to get this apart, you take a socket and drive this retaining ring back, and it will reveal, there's not enough gap to show it on the camera. You know, you can kind of see it. But there's a locking wire that engages in a little groove on the armature shaft, and you drive that washer back, you can get the ring off, then pull the washer off, and then everything just slides off the shaft. And then to get anything past the throw out fork out, you got to pull these plugs out and take the pins out and disassemble the throwout arm assembly so that everything will snake out, and then you can pull the armature out of the bearing. But I think, near as I can tell, this starter's been rebuilt. I'm not going to say recently because we've had it for, you know, however long now. But it must have been rebuilt at some point before we ended up with it, because the commutator where the brushes run is not, there's no wear hardly. Where the armature runs in the bushings, there is no wear. The bushings are round. I mean, basically everywhere you would expect a starter this age to be wore, there is no wear at all. So I think this starter's been rebuilt, and it looks like these plugs have been changed at one point too. Actually, it looks like this one might have been reused the way it's all hacked up. But anyway, I'm going to clean this up and we will reassemble it and then just pull the solenoid off. And I should, I say should because I'm not 100% sure, I think you can get these at Napa, because these are kind of a common replacement part on these starters. So hopefully this is a common, easy to get part. Although I'm gonna have to go to the Napa down in South Bend, because the one in Niles, they changed the counter staff, and I cannot stand the son of a bitch that's running it now. He's gonna drive it into the ground. But anyhow, I'll see if I can get one of these and possibly try to get one of these rubber boots. This might be a little harder. That might be something you almost have to get from a starter shop. But anyway, I'm going to clean this up and we'll throw it back together. Okay, I got everything cleaned up. But before I started putting it back together, I just wanted to show this. So because this is a mechanical starter and doesn't have a real Bendix, or I guess I should say a centrifugal Bendix, where when the motor starts, the inertia from the motor throws the Bendix back out and disengages it from the ring gear. This one obviously can't do that because you have a mechanical link actually holding the spur gear against the ring gear. So in order to overcome that, this is a sprag clutch. So when the starter gets thrown out, the sprag clutch engages, the diesel starts, and then obviously the diesel's spinning faster than the starter. So in order to avoid damaging the starter from the big engine trying to turn the starter, the sprag releases, and then the spur gear can just freewheel. So if you ever run into a situation where you got a starter that engages and the starter motor just runs, nothing happens, and it's a mechanical starter like this, chances are that sprag has gone out, or there's something kerfuckled right here. So, but I pumped that full of some oil so that it's lubricated, because it was a little growly, but now it runs really smooth. So, with that being said, should be good to put the starter back together for the most part. Earl on the shaft. This thing actually has serviceable bushings in it, although rather than having oil cups, come back here, rather than having oil cups, as long as they're still in there, you pull these. There's a plug here, and a plug in the cone. And you pull that plug out, and there should be an oil wick, as long as they're still there, inside this little nub right here. And you just take that plug out, pump it full of oil so that the wick is so that the oil wick is saturated. And then, since these are oil light bushings, the oil will just naturally tend to want to keep that bushing wet. So it's not a super duper like you have to service it all the time, which must be why they decided to put pipe plugs in instead of the oil cups, because they didn't want guys over oiling them. But they are serviceable. But I'm still going to put a little bit of oil on that shaft since I ran it dry cleaning it up. Oh hey, yeah, this starter has definitely been apart. It's definitely been rebuilt at least once in its life, because somebody has already taken the liberty. Unless they did it at the factory, I guess there's that possibility, but the book mentions that when you take the starter apart, before doing so, mark these two parts in relation to each other, so that probably means it didn't happen at the factory. So that's a good indicator that somebody had been into this thing at some point. Couldn't see it before because it was all covered in dirt. Okay, now before we put the housing back on, I'm going to clean these grooves out in the commutator because they're full of shit. Normally you can use like a modified hacksaw blade or something, but these air gaps are really tight, so I'm just going to use a dull utility knife blade. Oops. Okay, I got all the air grooves cleaned out, took some emery cloth and buffed it real quick to make sure I didn't have any burrs raked up. Took a flat file and cleaned. There was a couple burrs raked up on the edges of the brushes. I cleaned that off real quick. Normally, on the way they mount the brushes, you can get in there and like zip tie them open to make it easier to put it together, but the way these brushes are mounted, you can't do that, so I guess we're gonna have to do it the hard way. Oops. Don't want to do that. That wasn't too terrible. Okay, now it would appear that we are fighting the spring on the solenoid. So, yeah, that or I'm fighting this rubber piece. I might be fighting that rubber piece. Alright, to make life a little easier, to make sure I'm not fighting anything, we're just going to go ahead and pop that solenoid off since it's got to come off anyhow. Come on out there, you little bugger. That's what we were fighting. So now I lost where the dowel pin goes. There we go. Must be one heck of a spring. Okay, now put our little thrust washer back on. And a little bit of oil. And so there's two grooves here that line up with the brush holders. I would put anti-seize on these things, but they got to go through so far. You'd probably end up having more spread through the starter where you don't want it than you would on the threads still. Okay, so while just doing a little bit more digging for a point of failure here, I decided to pull the solenoid apart, and she's pretty... I don't know how well you can see those contacts in there. The main contacts and then this contact are pretty well foobarred. They're arced out pretty bad. That being said, I don't think that this was, I mean, this needs replaced. That's pretty rough. Like, that one's got probably a 30-second or more of material ate off of it. Plus it needs replaced now anyhow, because I was trying to take it apart and the nut got stuck and I broke a wire. But it needed replaced anyhow, so but the way this thing works, you see that little plunger, well, so this guy comes out, and that right there, so you see the light there, that goes through. So when you energize the solenoid, it pulls out on the plunger. The plunger pushes, I can't get my finger in there. The plunger pushes out on that contact, and then that contact connects these two contacts, and that's what turns the starter motor on for it to run. So that being said, I mean, I'm not saying the way this thing's arced out, it couldn't have been doing something stupid. But that being said, the way this works, the starter almost had to have been engaging the ring gear all the way, because this plunger has to pull out all the way in order for everything to make contact, in order for the starter motor to run. There's no way, unless something was arcing stupid in here, which is always a possibility. There's no way it could have ran the motor without the ring gear, or without the Bendix all the way out. So that being said, I wonder if what the grinding we were actually hearing when you started this thing was, like I said earlier, I wonder if this sprag is going out and there's parts running in there loosey-goosey, and unless when you engage it and it hits the ring gear and takes the torque of the motor trying to turn the engine over, I wonder if that thing's slipping and the loosey-goosey pieces in there are what we hear growling, and if you hit it enough times, it jostles shit around in there enough that it'll actually catch and make the starter roll the diesel over. So that being said, I mean, obviously that solenoid needed replaced before that wire broke. So this needs replaced, but I think if I'm going to get that, I'm going to go ahead and just get this and replace it that way, because as bad as it was grinding, you would think you would see evidence of it as bark marks on that spur gear, and you don't. Which has got me, that's got me wondering. Obviously you can't see it on the tractor because but that's got me wondering if this was thrown all the way out, and you know, like right there, I just got it to slip by hand. I'm thinking that sprag is slipping. I would almost be willing to bet. So I think I'm going to go ahead. Obviously I got to get a new solenoid, and I think while I'm at it, I'm just going to go ahead and buy a new sprag and replace them both and eliminate both possibilities. Because if I can get this thing to just momentarily randomly slip by hand, imagine what it's doing when you hit it with the torque of the diesel, trying to roll that thing over from a dead stop. So I think that's where we're at. Obviously I have to take this back apart again and physically remove this. So, but there's, and unfortunately, I think my best bet's probably just going to be to go to a starter shop and buy these parts. Hopefully they'll have them on the shelf, because I gotta believe they're fairly common parts. Because this is a fairly common heavy-duty diesel starter. So, unfortunately, the starter shop that we use, or that I'm going to check out, we haven't used them before, but I've heard good things about them, and the one we have been using, his work's getting real shoddy. If we haven't taken anything down there, shit. I think the last thing we had him do was probably the generator off of the Super 55, maybe, which I had to turn around and redo because he screwed it up. So, anyway, this new place I want to check out isn't going to be open until Tuesday after Christmas here, so. But luckily, we don't need this thing right now. This is a get it done while we got time project. So, that's where we're at. So I guess we will see the end of this particular video here toward the middle of this week. Hopefully, if I can get parts. Okay, so, like I said, it's Tuesday now. I managed to, the starter shop, or starter alternator, the electrical shop I went to, had the starter drive I needed and the solenoid I needed. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thing tore back apart to the point that I had it before we put it back together, so that we can get the starter drive off, and we'll get that replaced. Okay, so the book said to get the starter drive off, you take a socket and coming in. Says to take a socket and drive this washer back, and it should let you get to that lock ring. Come on, you booger. I hate wire lock rings. They're always so fun to get out. Especially when they're oily. I don't think these will get a hold of it. And they might. Nope. Those won't get a hold of it. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to dig it out the old-fashioned way. Got it. Okay, there's that. And then that'll come off. And then should be able to pull the armature out, which will get the starter drive off. And I'm going to clean that up real quick before we put it back together. Okay, so this is the new starter drive. Check out the depth of the gear and the width of the sprag clutch housing. And then look at this guy. This is the one that came out of it. It's got a heavier gear, and the sprag clutch is probably about a 1/16 of an inch or so wider. And this one weighs more. It's got a heavy, the spring has fewer wraps, but the spring is heavier. Like this whole starter drive is heavier than this one. It feels smoother. I mean, this A is a better starter drive, and then A, after feeling this one's definitely, that's foobarred. I'm guessing that's where some, if not all of our grinding, I'm guessing that's where it's coming from. But this new starter drive is a, I'm not sure if it's J&N or Zen, or if Zen is a J&N brand. Either way, it is made in Brazil, which I guess that's better than China. So we are going to, I don't really want to put grease on there because grease attracts dirt and dirt makes it stick. I guess I'll just throw a little bit of oil on it. Oil still attracts dirt, but it's thinner and not as sticky. So the big thing is I just don't want these rails galling. So we can, also there's a bushing in here, so we'll give that a little bit of oil. There's also a seal in here. So we got to get this part way on here. And then we got to get this engaged with the throw out fork. Oh. First things first, we got to put this phenolic washer in. Don't want to lose that. That is a lot smoother too. So now that the starter drive is back on, we can put our retaining ring back. And the book says how to get that retaining ring off. I guess I'm going to have to go back and look and see how you're supposed to snap it back over the snap ring. Which, just getting the snap ring back on might be a little bit of a chore here. I hate wire retaining rings. They're just not a good time. I know why they use them, it's just I don't like them. making your groove. And then somehow you gotta pull this back over that. So I gotta get the book and figure out how you pull this back over the snap ring. Okay, I tried the video getting this, but I couldn't get the camera in because of the way I had to stand. I couldn't get the camera. So basically what I ended up doing was I took a 5/8 and 11/16 wrench and used them like pry bars to put a little bit of pressure against the back side of that washer, because you can't, your fingers aren't strong enough. So I kind of did that, and I kind of stood like this and butted this one up against my side and worked this one with my hand and took pliers and worked that snap ring in, and it finally popped in. So that's basically how I ended up having to do it, because the book is less than helpful on that part. It just says install washer and retaining ring. How? So anyhow, that is ready to rock. So we can throw everything, nose cone and the housing and everything can go back on. So I'll get that done, and then we'll get to the solenoid. All right, so now you take this guy, and we can get these two bolts started. That solenoid's got to overcome quite a bit of spring tension to pull that thing out, I tell you what. This could be interesting. This might be a two-person job. Oops. You booger. I can get it pushed, but it takes both hands to keep it collapsed. I ain't got a third hand to put a bolt in, so I'm scared to put something around it for fear of, or like a strap or something, for fear of hurting it something. I don't know if I can run this thing up against the vise. Ow. Put a glove on, maybe. This would be one of them times where it'd be nice to see how they do it in a shop. That way you know how to do it in real life. Got it. Oops. One more. Now it makes sense why these front two holes are slotted. You can get your bolt started and that keeps it on there while you shove it back. If I had to guess, there's a special tool for doing that job. Okay, now before we put the connecting link back in that hooks the solenoid up to the starter motor itself, we have to fire the solenoid to throw the drive gear out, and then we got to check and make sure all the clearances are good. So they want a 23/64 to a 32nd. Or sorry, 23/64 plus or minus a 32nd of clearance between the end of the gear and the end of the cone. Okay, so the way that they have to, the way you wire this thing up to just throw the solenoid. Well, I don't even need to show you the picture. It's wired up like the picture. So they show it doing it with a battery. I'm not going to drag a battery up here. I just used a battery charger. I've been running it on a 15 amp setting. I made sure this was going to work. So you take the charger, negative ground to the frame, positive goes to the start terminal on the solenoid, and then you take the motor terminal on the solenoid, this bottom guy, and it grounds to the frame. So I just use jumper cables for this. That way I didn't have to make a jumper wire, and then the charger's here and here. So you got 12 volts incoming. Fire the battery charger. Solenoid throws the gear, or throws the starter drive out. So basically what you're looking for here is you want to make sure there's slop in this, because you don't want the throw out fork throwing this thing out and pushing hard up against that washer. So basically you want it sloppy so that the gear and drive are just kind of floating there. That being said, I think this guy might be, well, no, because what'd they say? 23/64, which is going to be, what, a tick over a quarter? What's that in decimal? 23 divided by 64 is 359, so you're over a quarter inch. That's quite a bit of slop. Where's Dad's? This one goes to 64ths, if I remember right. Yeah, 50s. That's metric. Tenths and 50ths. What did I say? 3. Let's just do it. I should be able to do it with calipers, maybe. Basically, go ahead and turn that off so we don't cook that solenoid. So that's 20. So let me do some math here real quick. Okay, so I did some figuring, and according to, well, if you use the dimensions in this book, it's actually, I measured to the wrong spot. You're not supposed to measure between the pinion gear and the stop ring. You're supposed to measure between the gear and the end of the cone. And that is about 400, 4,100, somewhere in there, depending on where you measure, because that's not a machine surface, which is too far open according to that book. However, this book is for a 1950, or would be for a 55 series diesel starter, which is slightly different apparently. And on this starter, there's actually a machined removable plug that goes right here, and there is a nut on the end of the stem that holds everything together up here, and you can adjust that. On this starter, that is not there. If it is, I can't see it. No, it's definitely not there. So apparently on this version of that starter, that dimension just is what it is. So, but this gear is also wider than the one that kind of, I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to screw with it. It worked. So, I'm going to put this back together. I yanked the, just welded a bolt to the freeze, or to the expansion plug, so that I can get it out in one piece. So I'll be able to clean that up and drive it back in, and as long as it sticks, which I see no reason why it shouldn't, just should be able to put that plug back in. So I guess I'll hook everything back up and we'll call her square. Okay, and before we called this thing good, I pulled all of the plugs out of the bushing oiler holes. So here, and here. And just pumped some, I can't remember if this is 530 or 1030 or whatever oil we run in that. Put some oil in there. The wicks are still there and they are still intact, surprisingly. So, but that'll just let oil wick down into the bushings over time, so that they're not saturated, but they are lubricated. So now I can button that back up, and I think we're going to go ahead and take it back over and put it on the tractor. All right, starter's all hooked back up. Should be good to go. So I guess we'll find out if we get any grindy. Hopefully not. Wait for it. Beautiful. No grindy. Just how it's supposed to sound. Not too bad of a start for 20 degrees out. I gotta finish getting the dirt work done around this barn. Keep snow from getting in. But I guess I'll sit there and let it warm up so that it's not just start and shut right back off. So that solves that problem. With that, I guess that's it for this one. We'll catch you guys on the next one.